This
Today we
conference
have
will now be recorded.
Tara Scott, who is the route infrastructure engineer in East Midlands, but in a previous life she has spent some time in Toronto with Network Rail Consulting, and that is what she's here to talk to us about today. So Tara, when you're ready.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for taking the time out, as Rebecca said, to join us today to hear about the Toronto project that I did for Network Rail Consulting. Thank you to Kevin and Ian for inviting me, or gently persuading me, maybe, to come and talk. So I see on the call I've got some fellow colleagues from Network Rail Consulting. So hello, this will be no surprise to you. What I'd like to talk to you today is obviously just give you a bit of an introduction as to who I am and my career so far. A brief of Network Rail Consulting, so thanks very much to Barney for sending over those. I think it's really good to be able to share with you sort of the principles around the consultancy. And then I'll go into the remit that we got for Toronto Transit Commission, TTC, as they are commonly referred to out in Toronto. What were the outputs of some of the work we carried out? So I went out with a section manager, John McGregor, who is currently in Boston, but he came across to Toronto to help me on this project. And then I'll do some bit of reflections at the end. So who am I? I'm Tara Scott, as Rebecca introduced me, as the route infrastructure for East Midlands. I put a picture there just in case anybody's forgotten what I look like, and I will say that is pre-lockdown hairstyle. I have subsequently grown quite a lot of hair. So I joined the railway in 2005, originally with a train operator. So I joined Virgin Trains as a customer support manager. But quite quickly learned that I quite liked looking over the fence as such to see what Network Rail was doing. And I got the opportunity to join the Foundation in Railway Engineering, which was a collaboration between the industry, between Network Rail and some of our contracting partners, to create a sort of a bespoke engineering degree at Sheffield Hallam University, which I'm sure many of the people on the call I may have crossed paths with you there. After you do your foundation degree, which is a sort of a mixture of university and work placement, I joined Bletchley Delivery Unit under Mr. Griffiths as one of the sort of senior technical officers within the technical department. But I really loved the depot and I really liked hanging out with the section manager. So got the opportunity to go and join him as an assistant section manager, and then worked up to section manager for Milton Keynes. I then got an opportunity to join Works Delivery to get a bit of program management and project engineering knowledge. I then, as some of you will know, moved down to Euston as the track maintenance engineer, which I guess is still probably one of the best jobs that I've ever done, being a frontline engineer in Euston, a sort of London terminus area. You really test you as both a leader and an engineer. I then took an opportunity to join HQ, as it was known then, Technical Authority now, as a senior engineer to broaden my experience. I'd been on the West Coast for all of my career so far, and thought it was wise that I had an opportunity to look at the wider network. I then got a promotion into the principal engineer role, and I looked after compliance and competence and the link into our maintenance engineer. I then had the little stint out to Toronto, which I'll talk to you about today. And when I got back, I got offered the opportunity to step into the professional head of track role last year, which I'm sure many of you on the call, when I started my career back as a senior technical officer and looking up to Andy Jones, was our professional head at the time. I still think he's God. To be able to sit in that chair was a huge honour and quite a lot of responsibility, but such a great experience, and works with some fantastic engineers. At the end of that, wanting to push myself a little bit, I got the opportunity to join East Midlands Route as the newly created route infrastructure engineer. Some of you will know, sort of in the old organisation, the role is very similar to the SRAM role, so the Senior Route Asset Manager. So I've gone from my beloved track, and I now look after sort of all the assets, signalling, EMP. So on a massive roller coaster learning curve. Obviously, you feel very comfortable talking in the area that you've grown up in, but I've soon learned quite a lot about 650 power cable and overhead line, which is all very great. I'm chartered with the IAT, and I'm very proud to be a fellow with the PWI, and I'm sure if Brian is on the call, he will be encouraging me to put my application in to get dual chartership with the PWI as well. So moving on then, just a bit of an overview of Network Rail Consulting. So they were launched in 2012 as a consultancy arm of Network Rail. They are wholly work for Network Rail and have their own board of directors. And obviously we operate as international consultant in the international markets. And one of the selling points obviously is the ability to draw down on the huge experience of Network Rail and their staff, which is very unusual for some consultancies. So a bit of a flavour of what they do, we do. The services, so from advisory, so auditing and benchmarking, organisational change, through to strategic planning, so helping for business cases and understanding future demand, through to sort of asset management and maintenance, and that's the bit of the business I joined to help in the Toronto project, into operations, so helping with the huge experience that we have within Network Rail to our clients, and then into sort of major projects and helping with programme engineering and management. So there's some key differentials to some of the other consultancy firms out there, as I've already spoken about. So having the deep-seated experience within Network Rail really helps our clients with some of their issues, because we've got the experience and we have the capability. And that then just gives a bit of a last slide of kind of why should people choose Network Rail Consulting, and why we bring excellence with where we go. I'm very mindful I'm going to interchange between I and we. I still very much feel part of the Network Rail Consultancy crew, so I shall say we, because I do still feel part of them. So moving on to sort of the business plan then, the map of the world. I'll go through what the colours mean. So the greyed out areas are countries outside of the scope of the Board of Approval in April 2012. The light blue countries are where the board agreed that the teams could look to gain work and win work. Moving into the dark blue, those are the countries that we have work. And in the sort of medium blue, that's where we've got we're actively looking for more work. And then this one, next slide, gives you a bit of an understanding of sort of the headcount around. Whilst Toronto shows a headcount currently of 0, we do have work, a remit agreed with TTC and looking to get more work with Metronet. And then you can see Australia growing there in the side. So a little bit about Toronto Transit Commission, our client. Toronto Transit is responsible for providing the public transport within the City of Toronto, and that's done by 4 subway lines, so underground lines to you and I, 11 streetcar routes, trams to you and I, and over 140 bus routes. And then on the right hand of the screen, you can see sort of the map of the subway and the streetcar routes. The yellow and green lines being the highly populated and highly density And if you look sort of towards the bottom there, that's sort of downtown Toronto. So a lot of the traffic, so people moving sort of out from the suburbs into downtown Toronto where all the businesses are. What worth noting, the streetcars and the buses run near on 24 hours a day. So you can pretty much transit across Toronto at any time during the day or night. And the subway, very similar to London Underground, run till about 11:30 at night, 12 o'clock in some of the areas, and start up again sort of on the outskirts about 5:30 to get people into downtown Toronto. So a bit of the project background now. So we were asked to come in to help the track maintenance team to have a look at how they could improve their track quality, how we could work with the frontline team to increase their competence, have a look and review sort of their tools and equipment that they used, and like all of us, how we could help them get sustainable repairs. There was also a requirement to help their chief engineer understand where they were on the asset maturity model, and try and give him some practical recommendations for both a short-term and a long-term improvement to that, and where required, provide technical support. I think it's worth noting that sort of the benefit of being embedded within a client. So John and I were based out of the TTC headquarters in sort of the outskirts of Toronto. Once the engineers and various other people found out who we were and what potential experience we had, I think we pretty much had a open door policy with people coming and asking us various questions, ranging from technical track questions to planning questions to just our opinions on various things that they were dealing with at the time. So how did we do it then? Like anything, we went to go and have a look at their existing documentation, some of their standards. We laugh in Network Rail as to how old some of our standards are, but theirs dated back to the sort of the early 90s, and I think their newest standard that we came across was early 2000. And they were a hybrid of various sort of American standards, a bit of Network Rail standards. They've had previous Network Rail consultants come in, so a bit of a hybrid. We did some interviews of key staff to understand, what they were doing, how they were doing it. It's really important to understand through relationships as well. And then, like everything in a good asset management model, is go, look, see. So we went out with the teams on site observations. So as I said, we did a review of their existing documentations. They kind of split them out into procedures and to methods of working. So if I reflect on Network Rail, that's sort of similar to our level 2 documents as their procedures, and their methods of working, sort of how-tos and level 3 documents. And what we did was we agreed quite early on with the engineer for particular maintenance tasks that they had issues with. And we would then review the SOPs and methods of working for those particular tasks, so we could give them quite a clear deliverable at the end of it. The interviews of the staff over the 6 weeks of the project was obviously finding out how they did maintenance tasks, what the training program looked like for those frontline staffs, and what challenges and obstacles the teams faced. I think what was really interesting for John and I, particularly for me, because John's currently in Boston and sort of had similar experience, the Transit Commission is highly unionised, and there is sort of the agreements, sort of hierarchy of appointment. So you could potentially be a bus driver today, and a role comes out on the vacancy list that is of a higher grading to what you are, and due to your seniority within the business, you can choose to take that role. So they have a huge change really with regards to keeping people competent because of what they have with regards to appointments. So that, for them, that was a massive challenge, because their training program didn't really facilitate this continuous change of sort of, from the Transit Commission. They also didn't have key teams or segregated teams, so they within track as such, so they were multi-skilled. So one night someone could be doing a weld, and then the next night they would be driving the machinery that they had down in the subway system. So very different to obviously what we were used to, and you just have to sort of take that into consideration, because those are the obstacles that they face, and how whatever solutions we were looking to help them with, we had to be very mindful of that. So as I said, we went out on site to have a look at what they were doing. I'll give you some stories now. So we went out to have a look at a welding shift. As I said, the welders, they're not dedicated welders, and I think the reflection here is, when you're a contractor, you're being very mindful. Oh, sorry, that's just popped up in the screen here. You have to be very mindful of your boundaries. But I did ask for the job to stop at a particular welding shift after I saw the welder put the bottom of the mould in after the rail was preheated with his hands. No gloves, no tongs, and just ask, kind of ask for a bit of a reflective conversation about, that's a little bit dangerous, isn't it? Yeah, but it's easy. But it's very dangerous. Yeah, but we used to have like the little wire loop that we used to be able to use the tongs, but the new set of molds came without it, so we just find that this is easier doing it this way. So I reminded them that they could definitely go and speak to their weld portion manufacturers and ask for the stoppers to come included of their little wire loop. The welders also, much to the shock of John and I, were lining up the welds with a piece of paper and not a straight edge. And as I go through the presentation, it's no surprise that they have quite a lot of failures around their welds and increased NDT testing because of it. The re-railing work done predominantly by hand. Again, John gave them some feedback on how to maybe do it safer, and what potential machines that they could be using. The tamping, for me, like everything else I've just said, they don't have dedicated TQSs, so track quality supervisors, and the operators of the actual tampers themselves, where we have contracts with our contractors over here. And again, these were members of the wider track team, so could be welding on one night, could be driving the tamper the next night. And again, I stopped the job to have a safety conversation because the team of support were putting their head right underneath the tamper to let the operator know that they were about to come up to a cable or an obstruction. And John and I quickly shared our tamping marking up standard, and it was a revelation that you could count down on the sleepers and show an obstacle, so you didn't need to have anybody anywhere near the operator. And then we went through sort of changing, the basic, changing base plates, pads and clips and nylons, track patrolling. Special work to them is S&C to us. So we went out on an 053 inspection, we went out on some lubrication inspections, and then NDT testing. So on site, so just a bit of a show of their infrastructure. So obviously very similar to London Underground, where slab track within the tunnels, moving out into open cut, where they had a various different concrete, wood. And what was really interesting was they were converting over to composite sleepers. So they were already starting to install composite sleepers to increase their sustainability, and they're not having to rely on wood sleepers. I'm sure the rail experts out there will point out why this maybe is not a very good lubricator. As you can see on the right hand side, that lubrication, the gel's not going anywhere. And it was little things like sort of getting them to understand about a proactive inspection regime, a preventative maintenance regime to clean that off, understand why it's not working. And this was linked to an issue that they had with screeching round curves and issues with braking at signals. So again, it was just sharing with them sort of our experience and observations. I'll let you reflect on that picture, what might be going wrong there. They weren't quite sure why the lubricators on the back end of the picture wasn't working. And obviously that's because the rail was cutting the pipes. They had tried to obviously block out the rail. So we shared some good practices about what maybe they should do with storing their rail going forward, and how maybe to not drop it on lubricator cables. So if I go through sort of each deliverable then, so we agreed that out of all of the work that we do, we would deliver 4 deliverables. And so the first one was around special work inspection. So that's switches and crossings to us. And basically for us, that was helping them put in an 053 and 054 process. They had kind of one, if that makes sense. But what we did, we sort of went through what our 053 inspections and the hazards associated with S&C, and we helped them sort of translate that into their own standard. I think another reflection for me is it's really quite difficult when people are talking in different terms, and I was really grateful for having John with me. John had obviously learned quite a lot from being in Boston, and when they're talking about frogs and different bits and pieces, I just used to look at John and go, what do they mean? It's a switch, all right, okay. So you're sort of converting, if you like, that process into their terminology, and helping understand what tolerances they wanted for their inspections. And another thing we got them to think about is they were going out and doing lots of inspections, but they weren't really doing very much with the data afterwards because it was quite difficult to look at. So with the proposal that we gave them for the operating procedure, we also gave them some suggestions about how they might do some analysis and help them with predicting sort of switch failure and switch wear. The next one, mud spot removal, that's wet beds to you and I. Their technique was what we do in some ways, so by hand in some locations, but didn't really have a process afterwards about consolidating the ballast, about actually understanding root cause. So we went through kind of the failure mechanisms and what they should be looking at in their drainage, and trying to address the root cause and not just the symptoms. And we utilised our how-to guides that are obviously published on YouTube, and showed them sort of some ideas around, again, new technology, so the Robal hand tampers, to help them with some of their consolidation. Tamping, this was really hard, if I'm honest, because it's logical for us to have a TQS dedicated, to have an operator that is dedicated, so that's all they do day in, day out, so they become very equipped and competent with what they're doing. But how they're set up currently, that's not an option. So instead we try to give them sort of that step-by-step approach of, you know, how to plan them, what's the best way of utilizing your machines, not just tamping good track because it's easy to get to. Try to get them to adopt a track quality process, track quality review, just to make sure that they were trying to utilize their machines and they were getting the best out of them. And then the last one around welding. For us, it was making sure that they got their suppliers back in to do some more training. They'd had some recent changes within their organization, so a rebrief. We suggested to them about utilizing a little team that becomes a specialist, opposed to trying to get everybody to have a competence and then not using it. Simple things about what the toolbox should look like for the welders, so having straight edges and gauges, because that then has a knock-on effect for the amount of welds that we're failing and out of alignment and all of those things that go with it. So again, just really basic what we think they should do, and also having a weld inspection afterwards to try and help with getting quality through their inspection. As I said, whilst you're there, we were there, sorry, there is a fine line between being really helpful to getting lots more than your remit, and I think that's just a balance that you take whilst you're there. So John and I, where we had sort of some capacity to help them, we got involved in quite a varied bit of additional work, so sort of technical and practical advice on a curve that had seen broken fastenings and rail movement, and it was just trying to take them back to basics. So, you know, having the right pad in, the right clip in, the right alignment, just really going back to basics. John went out and helped them on a crossing installation. Again, just real practical advice about how to measure up, what you're looking at when you're doing some installation. Defect management, they have a similar system to RDMS, but we went back to old-fashioned paper, a map, and we marked out all of the defects that they currently had and did a bit of cluster analysis, and showed them where they should be focusing their re-railing plan, and just to give them a bit of clarity. We did some coaching sessions with the head of Subway, so that's an IME in network rail terms, in how to manage conflict a little bit, and then we got some lubrication NDT. What was interesting about the NDT standard was written by the NDT supervisor, and just that check really of what they were doing. A lot of it was overkill, but it's giving sort of that experience, if you like, of what we've learned over many years. And I think I saw Mr. Whitney joining the call just now. There were a couple of phone a friends back to him and John Harris, just to make sure I knew what I was saying. And then one Friday, they had a streetcar failure where shoes were being ripped off the bottom of the trams, and they just didn't know what to do. So John and I went out and did track walks and track inspections and just tried to help with them on some root cause analysis. So it leads me to a bit of reflection. Obviously, network rail safety culture, we're all still processing the tragic death of Tyler. But I think when I was out in Toronto, the reflection of how far network rail had come on their safety journey, and there is so much further to go. But I think when you're in you know, a new environment, we're very good to beat ourselves up, but I don't think we're very good at reflecting on just how far we've come as a company, and how we can help some of the transit commissions to look at their safety culture and what they can do a bit differently. Asset management principles are exactly the same wherever you go. And I think we gave some advice, as I said, to the chief engineer about just having basic and asset management principles within his organisation would really help him align on what he needed to deliver for the board and for the people of Toronto. The other one, lessons can be transferred. I think it was, you know, when you look back at your career, I think the opportunity to go out and do some consultancy work really, you reflect on how far you've been and how far you've come in your own career and the lessons that you've learnt. And John and I could give the section manager and the engineer quite a lot of advice on what we had learnt and what we may do differently, which was really great. and it's great to, I don't think sometimes we do look back at our careers and what we've achieved so far and how that might help someone when they're just about to start on their journey. This one comes back to basics. I think TCC were looking at what technology could solve some of their issues. But actually, when John and I got them to go back to the basics and the fundamental principles of track and what those little things were, it really opened their eyes that, you know, they had the solution. They just needed to go back to the basics and get that right. And then they could bring in technology to help them go forward. Like anywhere, collaboration is the key to the success. We try to help them see what an integrated plan could look like with just in maintenance and in renewals. So unlike us, they don't have a renewals organisation. You'll be doing maintenance, as I said, on day one, and at the weekend you'll be doing a renewal. And that's for all assets really, and they're trying to do some enhancement work with their signalling system at the same time. But just whilst we were there, we led a PDR for the crossing installation that John went out to help, and it was a bit of a light bulb that we had all the right people in the room that could make all the right decisions, and everybody knew exactly what was going on, and the crossing was installed successfully without too much stress, just by having all of those right people in the room to begin with to do that PDR. And everywhere maintenance and engineering go hand in hand. Our first couple of weeks was we felt a bit like we were peacekeepers between maintenance engineering. I'm sure those of you on the call maybe can reflect on that. The section manager didn't particularly like the engineering department, and the engineering department didn't particularly like the maintenance organisation. But actually, when they started sitting down together and setting out the expectations and also trying to close some of those gaps of understanding, we started to see in the very short period that we were there that relationship was going to grow and get stronger as we went through. So just two pictures here. Couldn't leave you without showing my smiley face in my PPE. I think that for me is just a reflection of, you know, if you reflect on Network Rail and how we are full orange. This is the TCT's maximum PPE. It's slightly different. I'm not entirely sure what the little bands on my bottom were gonna help with. But yeah, if you didn't have those four things, you weren't allowed out onto the track. And then the other picture that you can see next to that, if you look, there's a ledge towards the back of the picture. That's where you stand when you get out of the way of the train. So you step up onto that, you put your back up against the wall, and as you can see, the train then goes past you. It goes past at about 5–10 miles an hour, but I can tell you it's quite an experience on your first shift down there, where you realise just how close those trains get to the inspection staff. And then I'll leave you with this final picture. I won't lie, those of you that know me, I'm not particularly keen of the cold. This was taken just before I left to come home at the end of December. It was about -21. I was dressed up like that. The P-Way lads that I was going out with on that night turned up in t-shirts. So yeah, a bit of a reflection of my last day in Toronto. But yes, summarising, it was an amazing opportunity, and I'm very grateful to be able to do it. It gives you so much opportunity to use what you've learnt, and you can really help. I think in the short couple of months that John and I were out there, I really felt that we did give the team the basic steps to help with that sustainable change, and we were also then successful in winning the next contract, which is to put sort of more embedded staff within TTC to help them and continue on that journey. So yeah, thank you very much for listening to me. I'm sure there's a couple of questions. I think Ian, and
yeah, they're there. Yeah, thanks, Tara. That was really great, really insightful. So the first question we got is just a quick one. When we saw that picture around the slab track going on to the ballasted track, was there a transition arrangement in there?
No, there wasn't. The ballast was quite. It wasn't very deep, so you could say there was a run-off, if you like. Yeah, answer that question, Ian.
Yeah,
yes,
no, thanks. Yeah, it wasn't one good. Then the next one I think is from Peter Halliwell, who obviously says thanks for the talk. Just wants to know how were we invited? You know, how did someone recognise that they needed our help, or Network Rail Consulting's help, I suppose?
Yeah, sure. I'm sure, is Barney on? He might be able to field that question, but I can put what I know. No. So from what I know, oh, there you go. Barney can answer that. Do you want to come on, Barney?
All right, I can unmute myself.
Yay!
Yeah, so, I wasn't sure if I'd be allowed to speak. Yeah, so we have a business development team in North America. They make sales calls to go and talk to all of the different agencies that we think might want our help, just about what we do, about how we can help. And if that turns into an order, then obviously we go and look for resource to deliver it, which is what happened in this case. Particularly, I mean, I was really pleased to get Tara on this job, because we'd had a conversation some months before about an international secondment being part of Tara's development plan. So it was really good for us as NRC to be able to offer that. But we're always talking to clients and always looking at opportunities for how we can help them.
Brilliant, thanks, Barney. Next question from Kevin are there any issues around the sort of the industrial regulators?
Sorry, Kevin, you might need to expand that one for me.
Hang on a second, I was eating a crisp. My point was you made a comment, or Barney had made a comment in his response about North American transit authorities seem to have a number of issues, which the consultancy, because I asked, do you as a consultancy come across the same sort of issues fairly regularly in various different in various different parts of the world when looking at metros and subways? And then Barney said, well, it appears that we may have some issues that are similar in North America. So I was then asking, is that as a result of the licensing stroke overall technical competency authorities in North America not being particularly well up on managing local transit authorities or setting standards for local transit authorities in the way of track maintenance, electrification standards, inspection standards, maintenance requirements, sort of things?
I think that's a really good question.
Right, from the Federal Railroad Authority. So, do you want me to take that, Tara?
Yeah, I was going to say something else, but you probably do the politically correct one, Barney.
Yeah, so there are two regulators in the US, the Federal Railroad Authority and the Federal Transit Authority. It's not particularly the same in Canada, but the issue in the US is that they set standards, and they set them a long time ago. As Tara pointed out, they haven't been brought up to date. They're not necessarily completely relevant, and they're not a very invasive regulator. So they don't have the same sort of powers or even appetite for regulation that we see with the ORR, and as a result, they're not particularly pushing the transit agencies to improve. So if you look at a lot of the improvements we've made, you know, the ORR have been a big driver of that for us, and you know, made us do the things that we really ought to have done for ourselves. Without them, maybe we wouldn't have done some of them. And without that regulation, that's why I think in the US and to an extent in Canada, they're not moving forward.
Great,
Thanks,
thanks.
Barney.
Yeah, it's great, Barney.
Could I come in on that, Ian? It's Andy Savage
Yeah,
here.
go on, Andy. Yeah.
When I was at RAIB, I met our opposite numbers and regulators from the US, and I was quite frankly horrified at the level of safety management of train operation over there compared with how we work here. I mean, things that we dealt with in the 1880s about lock and block are still subject to debate about regulation in America, and I think they have been enforced in the time since I left RAIB, but we're talking about 130 years behind us on that particular point.
Great, thanks for that, Andy. Very, very, very insightful. Got a great question from Steve Featherstone. He said, thanks again for the presentation. And did they have a process, do you know, Tara, of CRTs for the extremely low temperatures?
That's a really good question, Stephen, and one that we suggested in the next set of work that we help them with. So they don't really have a CRT management as such. They do some stressing, but not a lot of it. And they don't seem to, Steve, suffer from issues with the cold. More they have issues with the hot, particularly around sort of their sidings, where there didn't seem to be a heck of a lot of maintenance procedures. So no is the answer, Steve.
Thanks, Tara. Got a little bit of a personal question. Are you
Sure.
looking to go somewhere else from Andrew? He said, are you looking to venture somewhere else in the world?
If my wife has anything to do with it, no. I wouldn't say never. I think I'm really grateful to Barney and the Network Rail consulting team. As Barney said, it was one of my objectives a couple of years ago. I think I've got lots more to learn in my current role and in the current organisation, but I probably wouldn't say I'd rule it out in the future.
Great, thanks. And Mark's asked a question.
We certainly wouldn't. You'd be welcome back anytime.
Thanks, Barney.
Cheers, Barney. Mark's asked a question. Just do you think, or are the TCC trying to get to up to our standards? Is that their sort of their plan or hope?
Yes, I think so. So whilst we were there, as I said, we created the relationship with their chief engineer, and he has great aspirations for bringing his organisation up to. I don't think they'll get to our standards. I don't think they have the organisation. They don't have the budget as such. But I think having some of our fundamental principles, he was very keen on using. So again, I think that's the next work stream is to help them again, because it's like for us, you know, our standards don't necessarily fit every bit of infrastructure, but the principles and the critical limits do. And I think they were looking at something similar. So utilising some of our critical limits and some of the frameworks to then fit their infrastructure and their operating model.
Brilliant. Thanks for that, Tara. Any more questions? I've just put it on the chat. I don't think there are any last orders. Any more questions? Okay. Well, thanks for all your questions. If I could hand over to Rebecca to do the vote of thanks.
Thank you very much. Yeah, just on behalf of everybody from the Birmingham section and the Milton Keynes section for your presentation today. It was very enjoyable. I think there are a couple of key points there that we can all take forward, given the current climate and the situation the railway industry finds itself in, with using our expertise and our lessons learned and applying those into what we do and into future generations that are coming onto the railway, and specifically going back to basics. So I think there's some really key points that are still really relevant to us today. So on behalf of everybody, thank you very much, Tara.
More than welcome. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you.